So a warm welcome to Renee Clark, who is the Spiritual Care Liaison.
Liaison.
Thank you, a.k.a. the Chaplain at Northwood. I'm just delighted to have you here as our summer guest this morning. Welcome to this Sunday service, even though we're recording this on a Thursday morning.
Oh, we have our weekly service on Friday morning, so it fits.
Yeah.
God speaks 7 days a week.
Excellent. So we just earlier in the service we just read the passage that you immediately picked as your favorite. You didn't have to think long about that. In fact, you instantly told me what it would be. The second letter of the Corinthians, verses 7 to 18. So that made me instantly want to know what speaks to you in that text.
I think there are two sides to that, Hubert. The first one is that image of the treasure in clay jars. That image is just so captivating for me. In the ancient world, pottery was this humble, everyday vessel that got used for just about everything. Think terracotta flower pot, not Ming Dynasty ginger jar. It was humble and utilitarian and designed for a purpose, had all of the cracks and the flaws that come along with our own humanity and our own life experience. But it wasn't the jars themselves. Those jars were not the stuff of life in themselves, but they certainly held it. The water and the wine and the food stuff if they were used for cooking. And all of them were made by hand, all of them unique, just like every one of us, slightly different. We live in a world where so many things are mass produced now, our dinnerware among those things. But the ones that we prize are the handmade ones, the ones that the artisans produce, the ones we go into these little shops with the wooden shelves and see the potter behind the counter and look at these beautiful pieces that they've made. And those are the ones that we really still value. And another thing about clay jars that captivates me with that image is that they're opaque. The contents of a clay jar is a complete mystery unless you pour it out. So we pour out that treasure, that light of Christ, as Paul puts it, in the way that we live our lives.
I love that. It's I can see why that appeals to you. And now you as the chaplain or spiritual care liaison, where do you see that? Where do you see that happen at Northwood?
I think that I do a lot of journeying with folks. I've been here at Northwood for 8 years after I came from First Baptist. And, we have residents who are in their, as young as their mid-20s. We've got residents who are over 100 years of age, and they come from all different walks of life and different cultures and different socioeconomic circumstances, different family constellations. But the thing that unites them is that all of them, too, are what we might consider to be fragile, at least in the medical sense. They're with us for a reason. They're here because their health needs are too complex to be managed at home, on the one hand, and yet not complex enough to justify hospital admission, on the other hand. And those conditions for them are generally progressive. They're not here to get better and be discharged, which is one of the differences between acute care chaplaincy and long-term care chaplaincy. But our folks are fragile, quite literally. Their lives take sudden turns at any time. They can and they do. And what I do is to journey with them through that, with them and with their families. But, and this is the big but in all of that, is that I get to be witness on a daily basis to the incredible beauty and the resilience that comes along with the human spirit. I think of our Seeds of Success residents, the ones who are participating in our mental health and wellness programming. I work collaboratively with the Seeds team as well, and that's one of the brightest spots in my work. Because you see people who aren't afraid to be real about where they are. You see the way they reach out to each other, the way they genuinely care about one another. And despite their own struggles, they're able to see those of others. they know their limitations. They know their issues. They live with those things on a daily basis. But what they have is a determination that comes from something far deeper. And there's a poignancy that comes from knowing that they don't have forever to work with this stuff. You know, the clock is ticking for them and they know it. And so they find themselves in a place where they're willing to engage in this incredibly deep and authentic level with themselves and their values and their spirituality. And being witness to that, being able to participate with them in that, you know, moves and challenges me to do the same.
And you realize that it's not them, it's not their power, it is their resilience, but they're driven by something else, something that's bigger than themselves.
And it comes from somewhere.
Yes.
You know, in Christian terms, we would call it God and the light of Christ and the action of the Holy Spirit. And they might or might not use that same languaging depending on their own faith traditions.
Now, you've been through some hard times at Northwood. Was it even stronger, what you just described, or was it harder, or both?
I would say both. The last 3 months have been incredibly hard on everyone here, on the staff team and on the residents. And, you know, I've had a very up close and personal experience with COVID myself. And you realize what that experience can do to people.
Yeah, you just said that you have an up close and personal experience with COVID-19 yourself. And I know it was very early on. So you have a a personal experience, a lived experience of having gone through that. And I'm sure it has affected you, not just physically, but also probably also emotionally and spiritually. Can you say something about that?
Absolutely. You know, as you've said, I was among the first staff to become ill at the very front end of the outbreak here. You know, we'd been prepared, we were taking precautions and worried about the residents, and I didn't see it coming for me. You know, how are we going to keep them safe? You know, family visits are suspended and group programming is suspended. You know, they were getting to the point where they were eating their meals in their rooms. Huge changes, none of them easy. And you get all wrapped up in that and walking with people through that. And then you get that call from public health that says that your own swab is positive. And I'll say this, that you don't appreciate the emotional impact of those words until you've heard them yourself. You know, we'd seen enough on the media at that point that this was something to be very afraid of. And for myself as a person living with an autoimmune disease, that fear was definitely there. But the real fear for me came in terms of who might I have been in contact with? Who among our residents have I seen in the last 14 days? So I was off the phone with public health and on the phone with Northwood. And, you know, fortunately, none of my contacts swabbed positive, for which I was immensely, immensely grateful. And, you know, COVID, there's nothing like COVID to remind you of a few things.
Yeah.
That sometimes as clergy we forget. You know, it told me in a very tangible way that no one is indispensable, not even the chaplain. You know, not even the chaplain. God is still present in this place with or without me. My to-do list can be just wiped clean at a moment's notice. And I think those of us in ministry, and Hubert, you may or may not agree with me, we're prone to a certain thought pattern that we have to be there. We push ourselves to those limits, and then we're confronted by those limits. And COVID is one of those things where pushing through it, you know, sucking it up, popping a Tylenol is not an option. You know, when you're carrying a virus that has consequences for other people, you have no choice but to stay home. And as you're staying home, you're asking yourself all those questions. You know, did I give it to anyone? Is it my fault anyone is sick? And for me, that was the worst part, more so than any of the physical symptoms I might have had. And as I've said, I'm so grateful that it was shared with me that my contacts were negative. But it was the worry and the helplessness and the, being over in Dartmouth on my sofa, totally unable to do anything about it, and being confronted really with my own fragility. The caregiver's not the best care receiver often. You're used to being on the other end of this.
Yeah, it must be very humbling in a tough way, and it's on two levels. One is the feelings, those pangs of potential guilt. I'm the caregiver, but maybe I've been the opposite because of infection. Maybe I've infected others, so you feel terrible about that. So I'm glad that there wasn't the case for you. And the other one is you run into your own limitations. You run into a few walls, and you relearn that it's not about you.
Yeah, exactly. And yet God can take an experience like that and use it in some very powerful ways. Being among the first to get sick meant that I was also among the first to come back. And that became a good thing out of a bad thing. People would ask me, what was it like? And we know there's a whole spectrum of symptoms that go with it. But I would end up having that conversation, that what was it like conversation with staff probably 20 times a day the first week or so I was back. And that very being in the building again was one of those concrete object lessons that says you can recover from this. Even if you do get it, you can recover from this. And there's something encouraging to be found in that. And being a familiar face and a support for the residents at that point, because the week that I came back was the same week that we had reached out to other partners. And we had a lot of supplemental reinforcements here. We had lots of staff from the NSHA and the VON, and they were coming from everywhere to help us, which was amazing and such a wonderful outpouring of generosity in the healthcare system. Although for our residents, it was also hard for them. I think of that going back, almost 40 years in our minds to the movie E.T., which actually hit Netflix last year, so many people may have seen it again. And there's that point in the movie where Elliot and E.T. come home and the scientists have taken over the house. And they're kind of in awe of this and startled by it and not quite sure how to take it. And, imagine living with dementia and suddenly all of these new people are in your home and they're all wearing PPE. They're all wearing masks and face shields and gowns and gloves. And who are they and what are they here to do to me?
Yeah.
So that was really a time when I was quite grateful to be coming back.
I can imagine. And that's a wonderful image that you gave me there. As a movie nerd geek, that works with me.
Good.
So in a sense, you also experience for yourself what it's like to be a fragile clay jar, and to rediscover what's inside of that. That is something that's bigger than yourself.
Yeah, very much so. How much immunity those of us who've had it have, and for how long is anyone's guess. But I'll take what I've got.
So it gave you a whole new perspective on your work, on yourself.
It did.
The Apostle Paul talks about. His letter is primarily about persecution, of course, and if in a literal sense we are not being persecuted the way Paul was and the Corinthians were. We are being put through difficult times. It's not persecution. This is almost a natural thing, and it's either our fragility of our bodies through age or through sicknesses and disease from outside of it. I'm also thinking of St. John's that is proudly affirming, wants to be a welcoming place, a place of home for those folks who identify them as LGBTQ2+. And they know a little bit more about about persecution I don't mean it dramatically, but they've been through times that straight people just will never experience.
Both the overt and the covert, the obvious aggressions and the ongoing microaggressions.
Exactly. Yes.
Very much a reality. Yeah.
And some of those folks at St. John's and elsewhere too are thinking about, well, maybe at some point I'll have to go to a nursing home and maybe I can't be myself there. maybe I have to go back into the closet. Where do you see the clay jars in that case in your field of work?
I mean, certainly we would see ourselves as a welcoming and diverse organization, particularly at the upper levels. I think, the reality of how that filters through is experienced differently by some folks. We have residents from the LGBTQ2S community who have felt that they can live openly here. And we've also had residents who feel that they can't. Although those residents do have support from those of us on the staff team who can identify with those struggles ourselves and want to be supportive. It's not a perfect world yet. I really wish it was. And we're working on it. We're working on it.
It'll always be a work in progress. But I'm glad to hear at least that on the management level there's a concerted effort to work towards a better situation.
Absolutely. We've certainly been involved with Pride. We've had the interfaith service here for a number of years. Of course, this year's a little bit different for us in that we can't have a gathering that size, certainly not within the confines of a long-term care facility. So Norm Horofker from the Universalist Unitarian Church and Caitlin Smithers, who's a United Church student at AST, have picked that up and they're going to run with it as an online. So yes, this is a shameless plug for the Pride Interfaith Service. I'm happy to promote it. Normally I've been one of the ones coordinating it, but of course this year with COVID, that's just not a practical thing for me to be doing. But
I can imagine that the bigger challenge is some of the residents, I'm sure, who and it's also a generational thing. It is for some folks who who grew up in a time where being not straight was absolutely not was not a topic to be discussed, and they bring that with them, of course. And
they do, and it's the balance between those folks having the right to hold the beliefs that they do and, protecting those who would feel victimized by that, and as a Baptist, it's that constant tension of, I will defend to the death your right to believe what you do, but.
Thank you for that. We need to slowly work towards wrapping this up, although I really enjoyed this conversation. Is anything else you would like to offer on the passage we just discussed earlier?
I would go back to the tail end of that passage. We started at the beginning with that image of the jars of clay, and the passage actually ends in verses 16 and 17 and 18 with some incredible reassurances, that this life is not all there is. And that is so much a part of what I do here with residents and with their families. They're at a point where they do see their bodies breaking down. They see their bodies failing them. And with that comes this question of identity. Who am I now that my body no longer does all of these things that once gave my life meaning? Am I a part of something bigger? Is there more to life than this? And this is undoubtedly one of those passages in the scriptures that assures us that there is and we are. And for me, those assurances are just so beautiful and so comforting and so much a part of what this is all about. Yeah.
And thinking a little bit further along those lines, Paul makes it clear that it's not about your personal life. It's about the realm of God that will continue to live in us. And Paul even says in that same passage, is even my own death, Christ's death in me, is for the benefit of you. It's not for his own benefit. It's for, in this case, the Corinthians. He says, I will live on in you. And I think where you are in a community where death is very much present. But there's also constantly this sense of community. People are living together in some shape or form. I can imagine that you can pick up on that. Yes.
And it is a real privilege to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. It was incredibly enjoyable to talk with you. Thank you for your openness about your own struggles and your own difficult experiences in your work that you're going through. And We will hold you all in prayer this today and in days to come for the work you do, the important work you do, and for the
Thank you
community that
very
you
much.
serve. Thank you so much, Renee.
You're quite welcome, Hubert. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.